This presentation addresses the issue of whether decentralization contributes to poverty reduction. The issue of the value of decentralization as a means to achieve improved service delivery, increase the standard of living, and as a means of enhancing democratic values is an important issue to be addressed by those implementing decentralization programs. This presentation relies on a study done by OECD and published as a Policy Insight Study number 5 of January 2005. The meaning of decentralization and some of its components are provided in this slide. The relationship of decentralization to poverty reduction is based on impacts identified here, according to the theoretical thinking. The reality of this relationship, according to the OECD study, is summarized here. Not a particularly encouraging situation. But why is this relationship not more positive? The study examined these experiences of decentralization and poverty reduction. This slide identifies some countries in which decentralization had a positive impact. Which of these countries have you had some experience in or knowledge of with regard to decentralization? These are countries in which the OECD study indicated there was no impact or negative impact. Which of these countries have you worked in? This slide begins to give some indication of why the decentralization efforts to reduce poverty is very difficult based on country conditions. This slide indicates that countries identified as positive performers have some common characteristics worth examining. Here are two more characteristics of positive performers in decentralization and poverty reduction. This slide provides insights into the most important features of decentralization to influence poverty reduction. Do these coincide with your experiences with successful decentralization projects? This slide identifies the somewhat positive performers. This identifies some characteristics of these somewhat positive performers. Note the rationale for decentralization is mostly economic reasons. This slide identifies some other characteristics of somewhat positive performers. Compare these characteristics with those of positive performers. How do they differ? This presents a list of somewhat negative performers. Is Brazil a surprising one in this list? Remember, this was prepared prior to 2005. Where would you think Brazil would rank today? This slide indicates the differences in income levels and inequality of countries in this group. The somewhat negative performers have a background of political instability and conflict that shapes the decentralization objective of political stability and central control. The objective of pursuing national unity overrides other objectives. Is it fair to say that decentralization inhibits national unity, or is this just an excuse for not pursuing decentralization? This lists the negative performers and some characteristics of these countries. This slide presents the very difficult conditions of these countries to pursue some efforts towards decentralization. There are two basic determinants of whether decentralization can impact poverty reduction. These are the country context and environment and the design of the decentralization process. Factors in the country background include the size of the country, infrastructure, corruption, and income inequality. Are there others that should be included here? While there are problems in defining common patterns, some lessons from the social and political environment can be identified. The decentralization process must be based on local structures that need to be developed before poverty reduction can succeed. China and West Bengal are examples where local structures and commitment prove keys to success. Malawi and Sri Lanka basically failed in their efforts to decentralize and improve the levels of income. The decentralization design process needs to consider these factors. Which of these do you think are most critical? The key to decentralization also encompasses a transparent and participatory process. Some of these elements are presented here. What does all of this mean for donors? Here are some lessons for donors to consider. Here are two more donor lessons to consider. Note the identification of the transfer system in the process. Finally, these are additional lessons for donors. Note the importance of corruption, fiscal imbalance, and strengthening local government. Here are some common mistakes of donors in supporting decentralization. Maybe the last one is most critical and most often violated. Consider these questions as you think about this OECD Policy Insight study on decentralization and poverty reduction. How would you respond to these questions?